Please give me a warm welcome. Give me a hand in giving Daniel a warm welcome. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, I have to say that those 5 minutes on Jon Stewart brought me far more fame than anything, all those books and all those awards. I recall my son, when I arrived home after the show, said, "Dad, you finally raised my status in school." So I have been trained as an engineer, but what I'm going to be talking about here is the tremendous changes happening in the transportation world and why that's so important, and trying to connect up all the dots, because all of us work in some particular research area or analytical area. And so what I'm going to try to do is expand your horizons and all of our horizons to appreciate and understand what's starting to happen, what's on the horizons, and why it's important. So I have basically two jobs. My day job is as a professor at University of California, Davis, heading up our Institute of Transportation Studies. And this is, we like to say, it's the most prominent, most well-known university center for sustainable transportation in the United States, if not the world. And we did get an award from the U.S. Department of Transportation, the National Center for Sustainable Transportation. So I feel a little validated in making that claim. So we do all kinds of work, but it tends to be more on environmental, technology changes, fuels, climate, and those are what we focus on. My other job, I call it my moonlighting job. And I should say, for the university, there are a few graduates of my program here, and most prominent is Michael Wong, who heads up the Transportation Program Division, one of our star alumni. So my other job, I say this is my moonlighting job, is I serve on the California Air Resources Board. So this is the agency that is responsible for most of the climate and air pollution policies for California. So that includes everything from cap and trade, zero-emission vehicle mandates, the performance standards for our cars and our trucks, which are also currently national standards. We'll see how long they stay as national standards. That's as political as I'm going to get, I promise. So I'm going to bring these worlds together and telling you about what's happening in transportation. So a few years ago, I was with my wife, who is here and happens to be the vice chair of the California Air Resources Board, my other boss. And we were in this car and had a big screen that shows, GPS. And this was Los Angeles, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. And red means bumper to bumper, congested conditions. Every freeway is bumper to bumper on a Saturday at 2 o'clock. And I'm thinking, this is wrong. We've got to be able to do this better. So I come from the transportation world, and I know we've spent my community of researchers and practitioners have spent decades trying to improve our transportation system, make it more, in this case, at least make it more efficient. And as I note here, largely failed. And that's I wouldn't have given this talk or made this insight even a few years ago. And that's because in the transportation world, we didn't have the tools or the technologies to really make changes, to make the transportation system a lot better. So it was like, why bother trashing, the whole community and saying it's a failure? But if you look at it objectively, we see, you start with transit. Transit accounts for less than 2% of passenger travel in this country and yet we subsidize, we pay 80, as taxpayers, we pay 80% of the cost. Only 20% comes from the fare box. We've invested tens of billions of dollars on carpool lanes, and yet, as I'll show you, carpooling has dropped in half over the last few decades. We see we're investing, we're building more roads, and yet we're seeing traffic congestion continue to get worse. Traffic fatalities are getting worse. Greenhouse gases are increasing. What's good about this? How can one say anything but it's a failure? And so what we've created is this car-centric, what I call monoculture, and that's because we depend on our cars for almost all our travel. And it's extraordinarily expensive and resource intensive. We spend over $100 billion a year on building and maintaining roads. As individuals, we pay about $8,500 on average to own and operate our vehicle per year. $8,500 every year, taking into account the depreciation, the insurance, parking, and so on. That adds up to over $1 trillion a year. I mean, it's hard to even imagine these numbers. Oil, actually this is a diminishing issue because U.S. is becoming more of a producer, but we still spend hundreds of billions of dollars for transportation, for propelling our vehicles. And of course, climate change, we're about a third. So transportation is now the largest sector for emission of greenhouse gases in the United States. It's about a third. Electricity used to be number one, but now it's less. Industry is less, buildings is less. Transportation is the largest, and it's actually even more than that. If you count the emissions from refineries that are making the gasoline and diesel and aviation fuel, if you count the amount of greenhouse gases used that are emitted in producing the cement for our roads, it would be, nationally, it would probably be 40%. In California, it's about 50%. So just to kind of summarize it a little more visually, all the indicators are going in the wrong direction for the transportation sector. So the reason why I say I'm comfortable talking about it now and would not have even bothered 5 years or 10 years ago is that a lot of change is happening all of a sudden. But it is all of a sudden. These are the major systems innovations we've seen in the transportation sector over the last century plus. But what you see is they end in 1950s or so, 1960, on the freight side and on the passenger side. So we've seen, if you look back, so I've spent my whole career in transportation, and I look back and I say, my gosh, we did so little. There was so little innovation. We thought it was kind of exciting what was happening, but it was all very tiny incremental changes. And that is starting to change. So we have what I characterize as three revolutions underway in transportation. Electrification of our vehicles. I can't wait to go out and see your little station here with the electric vehicles. I'm going to see that this afternoon. Automation, meaning we're taking our vehicles, turning them into autonomous, automated vehicles. We have a lot of partial automation in our cars already, and we're on the verge of having fully driverless cars soon. And the third revolution is the sharing revolution. And this is kind of an easy way to think of it was, of course, car sharing, which hasn't really taken off that much, but it's Uber and Lyft, Via, and a lot of other companies that are being used. So this is a different part of the world than I usually hang out in. How many of you have used Lyft or Uber or Via? Okay, almost everyone. How many of you use it kind of at least, let's say, once a month? So that's over half. Okay? They didn't even exist 10 years ago, Uber and Lyft. Didn't even exist. And now look how common it is. Electric vehicles, they of course have been around for over 100 years, but they didn't really become available in, commercially in modern times until about 10 years ago. And here we are with automation. We didn't even think about automating our vehicles until about 10 years ago when Google made an announcement, said they were going to build a fully automated autonomous vehicle. That was 10 years ago. And so transportation, which tended to be one of those most boring places to work, if you were studying it, you would go to electricity or energy or environment, not transportation, has now become the sexy topic that everyone wants to study. And our students now are being recruited not by the Illinois Department of Transportation, but by Amazon and Google and Uber, and they're all with much higher salaries, by the way. Okay, so here's kind of a visual. Let's look at this slide just a little bit more. So when I describe what these revolutions that are happening, it's more than just the car. It's actually our freight system in terms of trucks. Over there, down in the middle, I think I have a pointer here. Okay, so that's actually a little 3 or 4 foot high robot that does deliveries of food to homes and other offices. Already operating, commercially available. This one is in Berkeley, California. I was in China at a big vehicle exhibition. They had a whole slew of these little robot vehicles, different sizes and shapes, that are about to be commercialized more broadly. This is going to be a shared electric plane and soon to be made automated. There's a lot of interest. There's billions of dollars going into building these very small, either 2-person or a little larger planes that are electric and automated and pooled. I use the word pooling because, take it down to Uber and Lyft, is if Uber and Lyft are carrying one passenger, their traditional UberX service, or what now Lyft calls classical Lyft, it's really not adding much to the social good. It's great for us as individuals. It's such a great enhanced service to have available. But in terms of vehicle use and greenhouse gases and pollution and congestion, it's no better and in some ways worse. But if those vehicles have multiple riders in them, what Uber calls Uber Pool or Lyft Share, and then there's Via and other companies, now we're talking about lowering the number of people per vehicle and greenhouse gases per capita and so on. So anyway, so that's why I emphasize the word pooling as the third revolution. So here you also see, so here you also see scooters, which 2 years ago didn't even exist. 5 years ago, dockless bikes didn't exist. So we see tremendous changes in all of, and then here is a little small automated electric bus. A large number of companies are operating those now. They tend to only operate up to about 30 miles per hour, but they'll soon be more capable. So this is what we're talking about. And then bringing automation to all of this. All of this can be automated. And then when we have automation, the cost of travel is going to drop precipitously. And that's going to bring all kinds of benefits along with it. All right, so potentially. So I tend to be kind of an optimistic, enthusiastic person, but I'm going to point out that this is in some ways a vision that it's all going to turn out positively, because there are lots of indications that it could not turn out positive and could even be negative. So let me just go through the 3 major revolutions really quickly. Electric vehicles. There's no doubt electric vehicles are going to dominate, that they're going to account for essentially all of the light-duty vehicles virtually all the light-duty vehicles, and there's increasing likelihood that they're going to account for most of the heavy-duty vehicles as well, trucks. In fact, in California, the Air Resources Board, we're the one that adopt all those regulations and policies. We are in the process, so we adopted a rule already requiring all buses to be electric. First, all transit buses, and now all shuttle buses at airports and hotels. Next, we're going to be adopting rules that require delivery vehicles to be electric, and we're going to apply these new standards, requirements, to both the manufacturers of trucks as well as to the fleets that use them. So this is going to be rolled out over the next 2 or 3 years. So it just tells you this is the direction we're going in. And every car company in the world has made a massive investment in electric vehicles. There's no question they're doing this. I just read this morning, Norway now is in Norway, okay, it's a small, rich country, but over 50% of all their vehicles are electric. Vehicles that are sold are electric now. In China, which is now the largest both producer and buyer of electric vehicles, they now build more electric vehicles than the rest of the world combined. So they are the leaders in this. California used to be, and in a policy sense we might still be, but China is really where the action is happening. So I used to give these talks where I talked about hype, the hype about new fuels, alternative fuels. So I've been involved in going way back, methanol and compressed natural gas and ethanol and biofuels. And so there's been what we call this hype. And so this was a graph someone did recently, but then I just, with the red lines and the dotted lines, show what's happened just in the last couple of years in terms of perceptions. So there's a scientific, mine is my personal observations. But battery electric vehicles the last few years have really gotten a lot more attention, a lot more support on the policy side, industry side. And clearly that's emerging as the dominant technology, at least for light duty. And what's behind this are the battery costs. So Argonne here is where some of the most basic research and development of the lithium-ion battery took place a number of years ago, and it's turned out to be extraordinarily successful. Costs have gone down from, 10 years ago was over $1,000 per kilowatt hour. Now it's down to about $200 and still dropping. I mean, if you think about that, that's an extraordinary reduction in cost. And that's why there's so much enthusiasm for electric cars and electric trucks. Tesla and a few other companies are building full-size, what we call Class 8 long-haul trucks that run on batteries. I'm a little skeptical about their application for long haul, but I've been skeptical of Tesla every step of the way, and they keep proving me wrong. And so, and there's other companies also. So that's what's motivating all this. And as I said, California, we adopted a rule requiring all buses all bus purchases must be electric by within 10 years. And all buses and all fleets must be the whole stock must be electric by 2040. And so now we're starting to extend that requirement to all these other vehicles I told you about. So I did make the point about China. So this just tells you, so first of all, China, just focusing on buses for a minute, China has lots of people, lots of cities, and lots of buses. So there's one city, Shenzhen, and you see it has almost 3 times as number of buses as New York. And I point that one out because every single bus in Shenzhen, so this is a city of about 15 million people, every single bus is electric, battery electric. And many of the other cities in China are now following that path. Okay, so what we are seeing is a rapid expansion of electric vehicles. And the fastest expansion is in China. And next is Europe. Europe is relatively recent, and now US used to be more buying and selling more electric vehicles than Europe, but that's changed. And it's changed because of what we call Dieselgate, that the diesel cars have lost support both on the consumer side as well as on the policy political side. So now in Europe, the automotive industry is shifting away from diesel to electric and making massive investment in rolling out every company is doing at least 10 electric vehicle models, has plans for it, and they're increasing it. So just these numbers here, this slide comes from the International Energy Agency, and this is what their forecasts are. And you see that electric buses, a four-fold increase in the next 13 years, the number of electric vehicles. Okay, I got a bunch of acronyms. Okay, call me out on them if, yell at me if you see an acronym. So PEV is plug-in electric vehicles. So that means battery electrics plus plug-in hybrids. So that means that like the Chevy Volt with a V, that's what the GM people like to do is they go V, Volt, as opposed to the Bolt, which is all electric. So that's an example of a plug-in hybrid. Those increases, huge increases in China. So this is what every forecast is saying. The question is, how fast is this really going to happen? But there's no question about the end result. So I know some of you here work on fuel cells and biofuels. And as I showed on that hype chart, fuel cells, have gone up and down. People are starting to revise what they think of fuel cells. So fuel cells are a device that takes hydrogen and electrochemically converts it into electricity. So you can have an electric vehicle where the energy comes from the plug, from electricity in the battery, or it can come from hydrogen. So I owned a hydrogen car for 3 years. The lease just ended, so I turned it in. So we have a lot of them or not a lot, we've got about 5,000 or 6,000 in California. We got about 40 stations selling hydrogen in California. So the question is, what's the role of fuel cells? And hydrogen, I think it's going to play a big role, and that's because for these big trucks, carrying all those batteries is going to be problematic. And even when you get into pickup trucks and SUVs, it's going to be a lot of batteries you got to carry around for all that, that add a lot of weight. And it might turn out that eventually fuel cells are seen as a superior option for those vehicles. So fuel cells are here for sure. Toyota is a big promoter of it. Honda is too. Hyundai is also. And then biofuels will probably continue and probably more from being ethanol used for light-duty vehicles into different types of biofuels used for aviation, for jet planes, where weight is a really critical factor, and some of the long-haul trucks. Okay, so, and then there's this other revolution, the automated vehicles. I call automated, more commonly referred to as autonomous. I don't say autonomous because they're not going to be autonomous. They're going to be connected. They're going to be connected to each other. They're going to be connected to the infrastructure, roads, traffic control. So it's a losing battle, but I'm continuing to fight it. So I'm saying automated. Journalists will say autonomous. So there's a lot of, so we're seeing automated vehicles on the road at different levels of automation. So this is, I'm not going through this, but the Society of Automotive Engineers has come up with a categorization of up to level 5. And so we have cars like the Cadillac, the General Motors has a vehicle, and Audi and Tesla that will operate automated on interstate freeways and other limited access roads. So we have one, my wife and I. We have a Tesla, and I love it. You know, if I'm going on a trip, just put it on autopilot, which is a bad name, by the way, because it makes people think it really is automated. It's automated on the freeways, more or less. If you go around a turn and then there's an exit ramp, it gets a little confused which one to go. Traffic signals, not too clear on that. They did just do a software update that lets it detect traffic signals, but I haven't seen it working yet. So, but it is pretty impressive. It steers it automatically. If I press the turn lever, it looks around and then switches lanes automatically. And then adaptive cruise control that many of you have in your cars already. You already have some amount of automation. So this is going to happen. Automation is going to happen. And again, the question is how fast, where, and exactly in what form, but it is going to happen. It's inevitable. There's almost no doubt that almost all of our vehicles are going to be automated. The question is when. So there is, if you read the media and you listen to even the CEOs of technology and car companies, you know, they're all talking about we're going to have automated vehicles in 1 year or 2 years, and you know, analysts sometimes point to these kinds of curves that show how these different technologies have, faster and faster capture market share, new technologies. What's missing here is the insight that these are just what you might call an artifact. You just can pop it in there, whether it's a washing machine or any of these other devices, and it doesn't really need the whole system to change, to adapt to it. It doesn't have nearly the kind of safety implications that cars have. So for a whole variety of reasons, it's probably going to be a slow process. Not because of the technology so much as all the other reasons, and I have a little chart that shows that in a moment. So as I say, even McKinsey, is acknowledging that, and this was a study just done last month for China, that it's only a matter of time before almost all the vehicles there are automated, and that they'll increasingly be used by these new mobility type companies like Uber and Lyft. They have Didi, actually ride sharing in China. The company there, Didi, is larger than Uber is elsewhere in the world, and they operate mostly just in China. So these are just, when I talk about automated vehicles, all the things that are going to slow it down. There's, you see lots of surveys that say a lot of people say, I'm not going to get in an automated car, I don't trust it. All the way to regulators and safety regulations, insurance companies, and so on, how they're going to deal with it. There's all the standards, liability. If an automated car is in a crash, who's responsible? Who's liable? Well, the driver says, I didn't do anything. I was just sitting there. Not my fault. Is it the software? Is it the hardware? Is it the company that's running the vehicle? Is it the company that made the vehicle? So none of that has been worked out yet. And this is just my fun little one. So a lot of the testing is happening in Arizona because Waymo, which is Google, they're actually providing commercial service, paid service for their automated cars, operating like an Uber-type company. And yet, as you see there at the bottom, people get upset. Maybe it's not even in Arizona. So you have the left-wing fringe and the right-wing fringe. They have different issues with it, but they do respond to it. So, people have been throwing rocks at these cars and slashing the tires, yelling them, forcing them off the road. I have a friend who says, a bicyclist, he said, I can't wait until automated cars are common on the road. He says, then I'm going to rule the road because they're going to stop for me on my bicycle. Now I can't trust people, but I know that automated car is going to stop me. I'm going to rule the road. So, okay, lots of different views on this. Okay, so automated vehicles are going to dominate. And the big question from a societal perspective is, are they going to be individually owned, or are they going to be operated as part of by mobility service companies in a pool as pooled services? So if we just took these vehicles, automated cars, and it just replaced the cars you have now, if we just superimposed them on the pattern of ownership and usage now, where you just go out to your driveway and your car is automated instead of manual, the result is going to be a dramatic increase in driving. And if you think about it a moment, it'll be pretty obvious, because now, or in the future, when you get in this automated car, you can do anything you want in the car. You can read, you can sleep, you can watch a movie. It can be your office. It can be your hotel room. It can be your entertainment complex. Take some friends out, and watch a movie. If that happens, you're going to spend a lot more time in your vehicle, right? So this is a study that was done by my colleagues at UC Davis and UC Berkeley, where they actually simulated the experience of having an automated car, and they gave a driver, full-time drivers, to, chauffeurs, and that's what we're talking about here, to a number of families. And then they watched how their behavior changed over that period of time. So they came up with an 83% in vehicle miles traveled. VMT is vehicle miles traveled. So 83% increase in driving. And that was with a vehicle that was identical to what they have now. When these future vehicles are outfitted differently to be offices and hotel rooms and entertainment complexes, you would expect that number just to go up. So that's what, from a societal perspective, that's what we're worried about, is that we're going to end up with a future of automated future with a lot more vehicle use, and therefore a lot more energy use, greenhouse gases. And it, from an equity perspective, it'll mean probably the marginalization of our transit services, because all the money and interest will go head towards these automated vehicles. So this is my book that just came out this past year, 3 Revolutions. So these are direct quotes from it, because by way of doing the book and trying to tie together all of this, it was really during the book that I came to appreciate that whatever the problem is with transportation, whether it's environmental, social equity, traffic congestion, cost, the answer is pooling. The solution is pooling. And that means just using all of our vehicles more efficiently. So it's Uber Pool, Lyft Line, it's what we call microtransit, which is basically Uber on steroids, meaning it's a small bus that is demand responsive. You just press a button, it comes to you, but instead of being a single passenger, it might be carrying 6 to 20 people. And so there'll be slight detours, but the cost will be much, much less. And so the attraction here is we can reduce the cost, and that means it becomes accessible. Right now in our society, if you don't own a car, you're really marginalized. It's hard to get to work. For most people, healthcare, education, now we make it accessible to many more people and do it at much less cost. Okay, so I don't completely have my head in the cloud on this thing. I do realize that the share, we're not, we were trained in kindergarten to share, right? Most of us didn't take that lesson very well. And so sharing is not something we naturally are attracted to. So sharing a car, so the car sharing. So that started to take off, but it's flattened out the last few years. Carpooling, as I said earlier, 20% of people carpooled to work 30, 40 years ago. Now it's less than 10%, even though we've built carpool lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes in most of our big cities, and yet carpooling has diminished. So the explanation here is this idea of all these costs that are not monetary costs. So we've started a big research program at UC Davis and my institute to try to understand people's behavior better and be able to explain it in a quantitative way. Because I showed you, so right now, if you have an automated car with 2 or 3 people in it, no driver, it'll cost about 20 cents a passenger mile, as opposed to your car is about 50 cents a mile. Uber and Lyft are about $1.50 a mile. This will be 20 cents a mile. So why wouldn't everyone do it? So we started looking at, I talked about kind of jokingly about sharing, but it's even more than that. It's all privacy. Do you really, want to be in that car? I mean, I guess that's part of the sharing is, do you really want to be sitting next to them? There's the aesthetics. Are they going to smell bad? Are you going to, distrust them for some reason? And there's all the data privacy issues that go along with it. And so we tried to measure it all, and we turned out that the cost for these shared automated cars are per passenger mile are about the same as they would be for a single if you just had a single passenger service. And so the challenge, so one, we need to understand much better how people make choices. So I'm going to give you a little slide in a moment about all the R&D that's needed for all of these things I'm talking about. But to me, front and center is behavior. We've got to understand how people make choices because that's what's central to all of this. And so in the end, that means we are going to need to bring policy to this process to make sure we reward pooling as opposed to car ownership, private ownership of automated cars. And if you haven't figured it out by now, what I'm talking about is a future where we do not own cars and we share rides. That's probably the most revolutionary of everything I'm talking about. So this is ideally where we will head, and certainly it's going to happen to some extent for various reasons, because I keep talking about averages. None of us are average. Some of us are willing to pay more, some less, and some of us are willing to share more, some less. So it's going to play out in different ways. But basically what we need to do from a policy perspective, putting my policy hat on, first is working with the auto industry, and they are already doing this, to make the cars more passenger-centric and more comfortable for passengers. Now we design cars for the driver. We go 0 to 60 in ludicrous mode in 3 seconds. Passengers don't want to go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. They want to be more comfortable. So we want to redesign the vehicles, so car companies are just starting to think about how do they redesign the cars for this future. We need to create disincentives for single occupant vehicles. ZOV is my acronym for zero occupant vehicles, because these vehicles, they can drive themselves. So you could go to a meeting in Chicago and you don't want to pay the parking, and you just tell the car to go circle around the block for an hour or 2. Or you send it back home and then to come pick you up. You start getting the picture on how much more vehicle use can happen if we don't disincentivize that. And incentives for pooling. So as I talk about accessibility, but I want to just finish this up so that time for some questions. But this is one of the best, from a transportation perspective, this is probably the best option we have to be responsive to social equity concerns, the haves and the have-nots. to be able to better serve them just by bringing the cost down. We're not, we don't, right now we spend a massive amount of money subsidizing mass transit, and we'll want to continue to do that for downtown Chicago and dense corridors, but we operate buses now in suburban areas where it costs a fortune. It's hugely expensive to operate it, and there's cheaper and probably better ways to do that. And especially as these costs come down, that will become more compelling. All right, so a big thought about all this is that these revolutions are going to be disruptive. They already are. The number one victim has been taxi cabs. Almost every single taxi cab in the country is either bankrupt or in deep financial trouble. They've lost half of their riders. Half of the taxi riders have disappeared in the last 7 or 8 years. And what you see there is, so TNC, that's the acronym used for Lyft and Uber, transportation network companies. They now, this year, they'll soon be surpassing buses in terms of ridership. And you can see the direction of change increasing at a dramatic rate. Okay, this is a little piling on against transit. I shouldn't do this. It is to make a point. Transit is in big trouble in this country. So 9 out of 10, 31 out of the 34 major transit operators in this country have been losing ridership for the last few years. And yes, Lyft and Uber have a little role to play in it, but there's a lot of other factors too. And even then, it accounts for only about 2% of trips, a little over 1% of passenger miles traveled. So even if it were twice as successful, it's still tiny in the overall scheme. So I point this out because we need to do a lot better, and we can do a lot better. We have the tools and the technologies. So as I said, the 3 revolutions are going to be disruptive. Taxis and transit already affected. The automobile industry is very scared about what's happening, and they're all trying to figure out how do they play in this future world. Rental cars, insurance, parking, vehicle service and repair, aftermarket, oil companies, all of these industries are starting to or will be disrupted soon. So just to, I know this is Argonne National Lab, one of the premier research centers in the world, so I had to give you an R&D agenda. So this is pretty high level, but there's lots of technology that needs to be developed. And I know there's been a lot of work done here, both with batteries and combustion engines. But now there's even in the electrification area, fuel cells and hydrogen storage, lightweight materials, vehicles to grid. How do we connect our electric vehicles to the grid better? Automated vehicles, there's the software, there's the hardware, there's all the connectivity. So there's huge challenges going forward in terms of the technology itself, but there's also the data science. Basically all these companies, Lyft and Uber, they're data companies. That's what they are. And so part of the question is, of course, who owns the data? But the other part is how do we manage it all better as in terms of building up these much more complicated transportation systems than we have now. If we're going to have all these new services, we're going to have scooters and this microtransit, where do they operate and how do you oversee it? Because government has to play some role, at least for safety, if not for just management of the infrastructure. And then behavior, as I talked about, corporate behavior. I advise and talk to a lot of senior executives in both the automobile and oil industries, and they're all trying to figure out, what's their business model going forward, because they are going to be disrupted. They know it. They're hoping it'll be slow, but that's for sure. And then policy research and how do we manage all of this? So, and then I'll be leaving this. I mean, this is on a webinar, so anyone can look at these slides, but as I kind of described to you, I've become a policy wonk because I just see that there's a huge need for all of our governments to pivot, to be able to understand and appreciate these massive changes coming. And governments aren't typically, agile at doing that, but they have to be. And so a lot more effort needs to be put into how do we oversee all these changes. And to kind of just end all this, this is how I characterize the overarching strategies that we need to be thinking about and looking at it from a public interest, from a societal perspective. And when I say public interest, I mean our economy, our jobs, our environment, our society, and social justice. So I differ with I talk to a lot of mayors and city councils, local politicians, and they're all worried about scooters and Uber, taking over their streets and causing all these problems. I have a different perspective. I say our first instinct should be to increase choice. People have no choice now in almost all circumstances. And until we give people choice, almost nothing else matters in terms of going forward. So if we're going to manage our transportation system better and our climate better using pricing, and you got to use pricing at the end of the day, to really empower the kind of changes and transformations we're talking about, people have to have choice. They won't vote for a gas tax increase because they just see it as punishment because they have no choice. So we've got to create choice. So that's kind of my own perception is we need to do everything we can to, if people want to use scooters, let's figure out how to do it safely. All of these Uber, Pool, and all these other services. But we need to link these better together with transit because we can't abandon transit. Transit plays a really important role. And we just need to figure out how to get the linkages. We need more incentives for pooling, more disincentives for single passengers. So kind of at the bottom there is my simplistic way of characterizing what our overarching strategy should be. And so I come from California where we have, and my agents, the California Air Resources Board, our strategy is to reduce vehicle use. Well, that's not very compelling. Most people aren't going to get excited about a strategy or policy that's reducing vehicle use. They depend on it. So the strategy, the policy should be to increase mobility, increase passenger miles traveled, increase accessibility, while at the same time reducing the vehicle miles traveled. So with that note, thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Questions for Professor Sperling?
Thank you for coming. That was a great speech. You're talking about one of the things you talk about, and I kind of have a question or a comment on this, is that you're concerned about the congestion in VMT. However, there is some research and studies showing that with vehicle-to-vehicle communication and perhaps infrastructure-to-vehicle communication, that increase in VMT doesn't get to the problem, which is really time. The reason people complain about VMT is really the congestion and time. The time for me to drive back home in Chicago is a big issue. If VMT increases but time doesn't increase for travel, then it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, there is kind of the dream with automated. So if you have vehicles that are automated and connected, we can imagine that these vehicles, they could be like just a foot or two, a meter behind each other. We can narrow the lanes because they're automated. They don't need all that extra space that us humans need. And you can pack a lot more vehicles into existing road space. And so there is the idea that eventually, if we had this, then we could accommodate a lot more VMT. And that is clearly true. There's two conditions to that. And that is, one, we're not probably going to get to the point where we have a lot of these automated cars that are connected, enough of them to really devote roads or at least a single lane to them for many, many years. And so until that happens, they're all mixed. When it's mixed, you can't do those kinds of, packing vehicles in, reducing headways and so on. So, that vision is at least probably 30 or 40, 30 years away or so. And then you have all the disadvantages of all that vehicle use. That is, even if it's a so-called zero emission vehicle, electric vehicle, there really is a lot of energy needed to power those vehicles. And it's hard to imagine we're going to get to truly a zero emission system. The vehicles have to be built, the energy has to be produced, and even renewable energy, you got storage and so on. So, maybe eventually the answer is yes, but it also will be costly to do it that way as well.
Use the mic, please.
Right.
You make an argument about getting over this hurdle of our personal private space in some of these vehicles, but we already give up our privacy when we get on planes and trains and buses. So I don't know if it's that big a deal, except for the fact that we do like our personal space, and I think that's what drives a lot of our personal vehicle ownership rather than carpooling.
Yeah, the way I characterize it is everyone has a price. So on a plane, you accept being squeezed in there because what's the alternative, right? And so that's the price. And so the question is, what's the price that people are willing to pay? So if we can do it from a policy perspective to increase and decrease, to disincentivize single occupant, to incentivize pooling. So that means more people are going to be willing to do it because it's cheaper. We can also do it, as I said, through design. So if you look at planes, the new planes now, the long-haul business class, I've noticed this just in the last few years, they've built these huge barriers around people. I was on a plane from China, and 12 hours. I don't even know who the person was next to me. I don't even know what they looked like. And so there seems to be this appreciation that people really don't like to see each other or share, or at least some people. And we could do that. I mean, if that's what it comes to in cars, we can build little walls in the cars that people feel, more separated. So that's all part of figuring it out. But some people are going to be, they want a deal. That's what the airlines say. People would rather have a smaller seat and less leg space and pay less money than to pay more money. So we'll see.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your very interesting talk. One thing that struck me in your talk was you kind of envisioned a future where mobility increases. But I can imagine futures where mobility really would decrease. Like now we can get deliveries of virtually anything we want, including groceries. There's just less reason potentially to go places. Yeah. So, what are the possibilities, let's say on the downside, or why don't you think that's a real possibility?
Well, the dream has been for many years that we'll use telecommunications to replace transportation. The experience seems to be, from the research, is that people still want to physically see each other. And in fact, what happens with all of the telecommunications is you develop a lot more relationships. So now my son has a whole slew of people he plays games with. He doesn't even know where they are in some cases, but wants to meet some of them occasionally. So there's this question about, the human nature. And certainly we can keep people, we can do most of our work, at our computer. So part of it will play out. What we saw in the research, like with that chauffeur study, is older people, actually the biggest increase was with older people because as we get old, we don't see so well, we get a little decrepit, and we don't go out in the evening or even during the day as much. And so that's what we saw with this, is that older people greatly increase their mobility. So, and then there's a lot of low-income people, physically disabled people. That's maybe 20% of the population or more that are very limited in their accessibility. So that's where it's unequivocally a good idea, is probably older people and this other contingent. So, there you got 30, 40% of the population.
Any other questions? One up there. You'll probably have to be loud.
Any comments on people who like driving their own car, just enjoy the fact that don't automate it, and not even where they are going, just the fact that they're all driving their car?
We'll have these race tracks. And you can go out there and race your car and drive your car. Actually, that's only half joking. It's not implausible that that's how it would turn out, because if you get to a point where most of the cars are automated, they're going to be much safer. And you don't really want, those manual drivers mixed in with that. In fact, almost all the crashes that are happening with automated cars and all the testing now, almost all of them are because human drivers get either impatient or just aren't watching carefully, and because the automated cars, they actually stop at the stop signs, they actually follow the speed limits, and so a lot of the crashes are just people, they're minor crashes, but crashing into the back of them at intersections and stoplights and things like that.
So you're then
Star student from UC Davis.
thank you very much. And it's after 28 years, now I'm able to ask you a question. So back to your 3 revolutions. For the first 2, I can see it will happen, the electrification and automation, because those are technology driven. But pulling or sharing, that's to me kind of your aspirational. This is what you or what we want, but I cannot envision how it will happen. Because you ask us how many people use Uber and Lyft, and I think all of us use. But if you ask us how many of us use pulling of Uber and Lyft, I imagine it's very small. You mentioned that in kindergartens, teachers taught us to share. But then when we grow up, how much we share? So I just cannot get my mind around how we're going to make a third revolution happen. So can you give us some specifics to make that aspiration to be a reality?
Well, I think it comes down back to that expression I use that comes from the economists. Everyone has a price. So there are going to be people, not everyone's rich. And, a lot of people are, even if they're rich, they're cheapskates. And so there'll be a lot of people just willing, as the cost of the service comes down. So just by definition, if you have 2 passengers, there's 3 passengers, your cost is half of what it is otherwise. And so, like Uber Pool now. So there are a lot of people that use Uber Pool. Uber and Lyft say that, depending on how you count the numbers, 20 or 30% of the people are using the sharing services now. And so, that would be the market answer. And then if you used policy, you could increase that. And, at some point, so I do a lot of work with BMW. I met their senior executives, and they said, well, we're kind of a premium car company. We're not in the business of providing cheap rides and shared rides. That's not really our business model. And so we spent a lot of time talking about it, and we both came to the realization that there's always going to be demand for premium services. And premium defined as, by yourself or in a nice car. So that's probably how it's going to play out. With my society public interest hat on, I'd love, everyone to be sharing. But from a, real world perspective, that's unlikely.
One last question.
Most of your examples seem to be in an urban environment.
Yeah.
What happens when you go suburban and you go rural? And then when the rural come into the urban, and you kind of got these conflict zones of people who do and don't?
So the rural is that's a really important question you asked. And both because so many of the people in rural areas, they're getting older. So the older generation I talked about in an urban context, it's even more of a severe problem in the rural areas. And you got a lot of low-income people, you got vehicle reliability, because you need to get to a hospital and so on. I think, so we've started a research program trying to understand that. I think it can work quite effectively in rural areas, everything I'm talking about, because the expectations have to be a little better. So like if you're in San Francisco now, Uber and Lyft, the expectation is a car comes within 1 minute. Okay, if you're in a rural area, you can't do that. But if you allow that to lag to maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes, I think we can provide a very competitive service, on demand, pooling, automated service. And, right now we have a big projects in California, in the Central Valley, which is low income area. And we're trying to, we're seeing there all kinds of ad hoc solutions. People share literally loan their cars to others, and they depend on relatives. There's a real problem in these rural and low-income areas in terms of mobility. And I think there's ways of doing it that we can take this technology and these business models and transfer them. It'll take a little more effort, different performance standards, but I think it's doable.
Okay, well, let's give Professor Sperling a big hand.